Hi, everybody. Hi. So before we get started, someone's keys.
Woo, that would be me.
All right. Yeah. You say go. Oh, no. Yeah. All right, everybody. So let's just get some of those excited jitters out and say welcome to our 5th Root Social Justice Forum. We are very excited today to partner with Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform. So thank you. We'll get more into that later. My first question is, whose first time is this at the Root today? Wow. Okay, who's been here before? Wow, that's a lot of hands. So, for everyone, quick logistics are that there are 2 exits on either side here. We're a little packed today, so just be aware of that. There are bathrooms in the back right corner. And then there's also another bathroom if you're able to go upstairs to the 2nd floor. Bear with me, you go out that door, and then up the stairs, and then through a door, and then to the left, and then it's kind of like right above that. Yeah, that helps. Or you can just wait and use this one. Great, so the Root is about 2.5 years old, so it's a relatively new establishment here in Brattleboro, and we are a dual project. We are a co-working office collective by day, and a community justice center and community event space for nights and weekends. So during the day, I'm going to ask the Root Collective to come over for a sec. Woo! During the day, this space is used as an office space for our 4 organizations and businesses. So I am Alex Fisher with Open Bookkeeping.
Sheila Linton with the Vermont Workers Center.
Mel Motel with Just Schools Project.
And Angela Brookfield with Act for Social Justice.
And together the 4 of us are the Root Collective members. So we run the space currently. What this space is used for is from 5 p.m. onward on weekdays, and on the weekends, the space is open for other groups and organizations to use for community organizing and justice organizing. So some of those groups are doing stuff around radical mental health, around queer community building, around supporting new mothers, around Spanish storytelling. Anything else that people have come to? Racial justice organizing and a study group. Great, so those are some of the things that happen here that you can check out on our website. There's a calendar there with upcoming events that, again, are organized by other people in the community. This is the only event that we organize. And Sheila, I will now pass it off to you.
Okay, great. So welcome everybody. I'm happy to have you here at one of the Root Social Justice Forums. As many of you know, the Root Collective and Root Social Justice Center was founded about 2 years ago. And the Root Collective members came together, and we each had a central goal of challenging inequality and dismantling racism. And because of that, we made commitments not only within our personal lives, but within our businesses and organizations, as well as to the community. And hence one of the reasons why we not only have a working office collective, which addresses social justice issues, uplifting economic justice and racial justice, but we also try to work to provide a community space where others can come together to work on those issues and beyond. So the forums that we create here at the Root Social Justice Center are in collaboration with various different people. Today we are collaborating with Vermonters for Criminal Justice to talk about mass incarceration in Vermont. But all of our forums have an economic or a racial justice theme to them, where we actually really look at how perpetuating of capitalism and of racism in our society actually divides us as a core. So when you come to our forums, we hope that it's not just a forum that you come to, but that you're looking at it and you're examining it as oneself from the lens of economic and racial justice. We also believe as a Root Collective that in order to really dismantle and challenge these systems of oppression, we have to understand how they're interconnected. And you really cannot speak about racism without speaking about classism and therefore on. So we hope that you come to our many forums that we'll put on and that you'll look at it through that lens and many lenses of social justice as we move forward.
And as part of that, we want to say something about prison abolition today before we start talking about mass incarceration. I'm going to read from my phone here. Feels kind of funny, but. So the Root Collective believes in prison abolition, even as we believe in addressing the harm that prisoners are experiencing right now and resisting the criminalization of poor and communities of color. Prison abolition is a concept that was made popular by activist and scholar Angela Davis. And this is what she writes in her book, Abolition, Democracy, Beyond Empire, Prisons, and Torture. Imprisonment is the punitive solution to a whole range of social problems that are not being addressed by social institutions. I see abolition as a project that involves reimagining institutions, ideas, and strategies, and creating new institutions, ideas, and strategies that will render prisons obsolete. It's a big dream.
Woo! Let's give a round of applause for that.
And if you've heard Angela Davis speak, you've heard her talk about the history of imprisonment. And you know that things have changed very dramatically in the last 40 years, going from 300,000 people incarcerated in the 70s to over 2 million people incarcerated today, very directly connected to the privatization of prisons. The Root Collective believes that the reimagining that Angela Davis is talking about is crucial for the health of our communities. And we ask that today we engage in this discussion in that spirit of reimagining, even as we are grounded in the very real struggle for prisoners' rights and resisting mass incarceration.
All right, and with that, I'm going to get us started on our program today. How many of you received a piece of paper when you walked in? Okay, wonderful. How many did not? Great, so let's send some of those around.
Okay, those who want a piece of paper, keep your hands up, please, and some papers will be going around.
So I want to give you a brief overview of what today is going to look like. We're going to start with an interactive activity, which we're doing right now, where you're going to turn to a partner and talk about some stuff. After that, Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform is going to do a presentation about their work and some of the stories they've been collecting from incarcerated folks and their families. And then that is going to be followed by our panel discussion. We have 4 amazing panelists here with us today. They are going to be sharing their experiences and their suggestions for change, and then we're going to get to have a Q&A with the panelists. So it's interactive activity, presentation, panel. That's what that's going to look like, and then we're going to close. We will have a quick, maybe 5-minute break before the panel that'll give our panelists a chance to get settled here and give you a chance to go to the bathroom, do what you need to do. But otherwise, we have a lot of content and we're going to keep it moving pretty quickly. Okay, we've got a lot to cover. I have are those questions or you need paper?
Mine's a question.
Great, Ellen.
A big piece of paper on this thing that is blocking our vision. Does it have to be? Can we take
It is going to be, those are questions that you're going to be answering in a couple of minutes and then we'll take it down.
Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. Other questions? That's just a hand waving. Okay, great, wonderful. So I'm going to get us started, and I'm going to invite Hunter to join me. And I'm going to say again, for those of you who just came in here, if you are someone that needs a seat and standing is not something that you're able to do, please. We have one seat over there. We can make and have discussions with each other about. Standing up and making room for somebody else, okay? So we're gonna get started. Great. So I'll start. Sure. Let's start. So the title of our event today is Mass Incarceration and Vermont. So part of what we're trying to do is really draw the connections between mass incarceration as a phenomenon happening in the U.S. and the fact that this affects us personally and our communities here today in Vermont. So this first is designed to sort of start us off with making some of those broader connections and laying the foundation for our particular problems that are going on in Vermont.
Sure. So we all have pieces of paper, which may or may not correlate with your neighbor's piece of paper, but that's all right. So we're just making little groups, however you need to, in 2s and 3s, and discuss the facts that we've given you.
We have 3 questions.
And
if thank you for unveiling those questions for those in the back who might not be able to see so well. I'm going to say them out loud, and feel free to look at them as well or ask your neighbor to remind you what I said if you didn't hear me. You're going to talk with a partner or your small group about 1, what is your reaction to this information? 2, is there anything you agree with, disagree with, or want to add to the information? And 3,
How, if at all, does the information relate to race and racism?
okay? So you're gonna have about 6 or 7 minutes to turn to a partner or a small group and discuss these questions, and then we're gonna bring it back and share out a little bit, all right? All right.
It sounds like you're all having some really rich discussions. It got very loud in here. So we're gonna start sharing out. So things that came out of your conversations that you want to share with the group. Sorry? Things that you'd like to share out with the group that you found interesting or compelling or provoking.
Let's just go one by one.
That's a great idea.
So, someone who had the one starting with the word today, will you share out loudly what that is? Starts with today. Can you share loudly for us?
Today, there are more than 10,500 prisoners shipped out of their home state to private prisons. Vermont is one of the 4 states, along with Idaho, California, and Hawaii, that sends out prisoners to out-of-state private prisons. We've been doing so since 2004.
What do you all think about that? So folks who had that fact within your groups, what did you talk about in regards to that fact?
This is your chance to talk today too, so now you're time to do it.
This is weird. My first question was like, Vermont doesn't have prisons? Like, why is that? And then they're like, oh, they're not big enough to hold all the people they're arresting. That's weird, I think. That's bad, I think.
Mike, we were talking a little bit about this, about why those 4 states. You know, what is it about the privatization of the prison system? Because those seemed like really random states to be sending people out of state. Anyway, I was just trying to figure, it would be nice to know more about what has led up economically to that, or not even economically, but obviously all of the different lenses.
Privatization.
So bad, weird, why these particular states? What's the name of the organization that Locked Up and Shipped Away is with, the collaboration?
Grassroots leadership.
Grassroots Leadership. So just so you know, Grassroots Leadership is a great organization to look into to learn more about these particular 4 states and about privatization. And will you all talk about that a little bit?
Good.
Yeah, great. So there will be more on that.
Our group was talking about how, you know, there's a financial incentive for the private prisons to make money off of that, and then someone in the group was saying, well, does the government also make money off of prisons? But then we were talking a little bit about how potentially, but more, the government is able to maintain white power based off of prison, so it's like the perfect collusion of maintaining white power and building profit. So it's very powerful, yeah.
The intersection of white supremacy and profit.
Yeah, what
and
you
that
guys
question about, okay, so with privatization, you have companies making money, but is the government also benefiting from non-private prisons? It's a really good question.
Sure. Great. Let's go on to the next one. So who has the fact that starts with the word nationally? If that wants to say it real loud.
John? Will you share?
Yeah.
Share it
I'll
like
be
this?
happy to share. Can I do like all 3, or do you have to do one?
Well, can you tell us what the fact is? Because not everybody got that one, so they know what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Practice for later.
Nationally, an estimated 5.85 million Americans are denied the right to vote because of laws that prohibit voting by people with felony convictions. Felony disenfranchisement is an obstacle to participation in democratic life, which is exacerbated by racial disparities in the criminal justice system, resulting in 1 of every 3 African Americans unable to vote.
1 in every 13.
13, I'm sorry, what did I say?
Which is still an alarming number and not okay.
Yes.
13, thank you.
So what did you, do you want to?
So, well, my first response, my two notes next to me agreed, and I said I do, and I'd like to add that are we looking at nationally, are we looking at locally? Because Vermont and Maine, who looked it up while we were here, because Vermont is one of 2 states that you do not lose your right to vote, and that definitely relates to race and racism.
How do you think it relates to race and racism, if I may? How does it relate to race and racism, if I may probe your group?
For me,
Yes.
if I use if I use the definition for racism, a system of advantage based on race, and you look at how many whites live in Maine and Vermont, and understanding that not being able to vote is a disenfranchisement, that they lobbied for that.
Any other, Sheila?
So just in clarifying that, so what that means is that currently right now Maine is the whitest state in the nation and Vermont is the second, and they vacillate back and forth between each other. So what Sean is actually saying is, or tell me if I'm wrong, but my interpretation is because they are predominantly white states, that's why they have advocated to have people who have felons be able to vote. Because disproportionately, both of these states are populated by white folks.
Alyssa, did you
Sorry,
want to comment on
the
that?
opposite of that is a state like California would never let people that haven't been incarcerated vote, because that would be too many people of color that would be voting.
Yeah, so limiting people of color, it's a mechanism to limit people of color from voting and having political power. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. We are gonna keep going deeper and deeper, but we are gonna move on just because we want to get to the presentation quickly. So what about the next one?
So it'd be hard to read it, but who has the racial disparity between U.S. and incarcerated population chart?
Yes. One of the 2 charts, the one that has the white background. Ellen, can you distill what you read there for people who don't have it?
So it's a bar, there's 2 bar graphs. The title is Racial Disparity Between U.S. and Incarcerated Population. So on the left is the U.S. population, and about 70% white, about 15% non-Hispanic Black, and about 15% Hispanic Black. And the second chart is a bar graph of incarcerated population, again in the United States. And it would be, let's see, white about 40%, non-Hispanic Black around 50%, and Hispanic or Latino about 20%. Probably the numbers are not exactly up to 100 because it's a little hard to read, but that's the gist of it.
Thank you. So anyone who had that graph or got to talk about it, what did you come up with that you'd like to share? Ellen.
So we were not surprised, but appalled. We were interested to see what this graph would look like if it were Vermont. And the third thing was, maybe that's coming up, was a question about whether, like, what this graph would have looked like pre-war on drugs. We were sort of speculating that it probably still would have had a disparity in favor of white, well, not in favor of, but with more Black and Hispanic people, but we were wondering if it would have looked a little differently before the war on drugs.
The idea being that the war on drugs is something that has continued to increase the amount of people of color that are being locked up.
Exactly.
And communities of color that are being locked up because of the war on drugs.
That was where that question was from.
Great. Other thoughts on that one? I think that's John.
Well, I'm trying to phrase this. So, in my experience had been before the war on drugs that many of the men of color were being arrested for domestic violence issues, and how various communities were responding to that. And I'm thinking about that in what Maine's governor had just recently said, and in that connection. And so, you know, that thread of, yes, that does happen, and when did it stop happening? When did people, mostly males, go into other areas for whatever reasons, whether it was their own in service to something else, and didn't help to establish good relations and leaving part of who they are and establish families as such. And so that has been, whether this country, whether Europe, whether Asia, when you think of what point in history have we not sent the able bodies forward in order for them to have economic development, whatever that looked like? When has that stopped? And at what point do we now point it out, and where does race come into it, or various ethnicities? That's what I wanted to add.
Can I have clarification
Sure.
of what the comment by the governor was that you were referring to?
That men with what one would perceive as urban or African American were coming up and impregnating the
Coming up, selling drugs.
And impregnating, and I don't know if he used Maine or white women, but
He said impregnate a young white girl before they leave.
Thank you. So that's the statement, and I would just ask you to analyze the statement and then think when and where in history did not young, able-bodied males not go first? And what happens as a result of that?
Thank you.
All right, so let's move on to the last fact, which is the other graph of the Vermont incarceration rates by race and ethnicity.
My friends, I'm hearing like some side conversations, and I'm hoping that we can just listen to the one person who's speaking now, just so that we can all hear. Thanks.
So the last graph, Vermont incarceration rates by race and ethnicity. Please, Tyler.
Hi. This is a Vermont graph talking about incarceration rates by race and ethnicity per 100,000, which breaks it down into percents. Generally white are incarcerated in Vermont at 0.25%, Hispanic just under 1%, Black at 2.25%, and American Indian / Alaska Native at 1.3%.
Our group was wondering why Asian Americans didn't appear on this chart.
And I was wondering that as well.
Good question. People might also be wondering why on the previous graph it was only non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black, and Hispanic or Latino, leaving off Native Americans as well, which we note. Good question. I don't know. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah. Other thoughts with that, particularly in relation to the graph we just talked about the national racial disparities? Yes?
Well, I thought it was interesting, I mean, we were talking about the sort of disproportionate arrest rates and incarceration rates for the same offenses, particularly drug-related offenses and marijuana. And just something that I thought was interesting was that I work for a court diversion program, and the demographics of our program are overwhelmingly white, and so it's interesting to me that in a state that has some progressive things like diversion, that these are the incarceration rates, and the diversion rates, which court diversion is basically you get court diversion. Mostly first-time offenders, and it's all prosecutorial discretion. So it's interesting to me that most of the folks being sent to our program for diversion are reflective of the population of Vermont, and folks being sent to incarceration are very much not.
It's really important for us to know. Curtis?
Yeah, the other curiosity about the lack of Asians on the chart is the fact that Asians as a group has the largest population amongst ethnic racial minorities in the state of Vermont. So you've got the highest proportion of minorities who are Asian,
Right.
but none of them show up statistically in the.
So what's that? Is that still a question of what's that about? What's it about that they're not on the chart, given that this is the?
Do they not commit crimes? I don't think I've seen an Asian commit a crime in a newspaper. I haven't. It's been a while.
So what's that about? Does anyone have any thoughts about what that might be about?
You've got a hand over there.
Okay, from someone that we haven't heard from yet.
I believe that it is because there isn't a disparity, whether it's not they're not underrepresented or they're not overrepresented.
Wait, because white's the standard, so if it's not Asian people are allowed to add white.
No, it's the standard is the Asian population and the general Vermont population. So it's not shown because there's not more or less. So it's probably equal, or they're so small of the incarcerated population that they actually are not significant for this graph.
And you're responding directly to this report too, because
Yeah, so I know the methodology because I work at the organization, so.
we have a direct answer.
In a more urban place, that might not be the case, like Seattle or LA or New York.
Do you have a sense of that? Because you've done it. You've done a statewide or nationwide.
It's going to show in different racial groups. So if you look at a state where there is, a significant Asian population incarcerated, you will see them in that graph. But for Vermont, it just wasn't the case.
Can I ask a question again in clarification? Some of the experiences that we had, and it's looking at other social service agencies that because it had come up that they weren't serving the Asian population, and what had come out with that is that they were getting their needs met. That they weren't necessarily needing to go to the various agencies that are out there, and that might be one of the reasons that they were
Sorry to keep talking.
I see a direct response right
Sorry
here.
to keep talking, but
Great.
nationally, I don't know the exact data, but I know at least where I was living in California, the rate of incarceration, I think, for Asians is probably similar or slightly lower sometimes, but there's split in the Asian community, and depending on where you come from and what generation, usually, like, I forget how it's split up, but like, like Samoan or Cambodian are like much more likely to be incarcerated than like Chinese or Japanese, and so that's a split I saw definitely in urban areas, and I think it has to do with class too. And so based off of if they're coming here, by choice for business, and that's their migration pattern versus if they're coming here because we had a genocide there, and that's their migration pattern, then their class is different, then their incarceration rate is different. And so that's a national trend, and so I guess you could look at the migration pattern of people coming to Vermont, and you might be able to see splits up inside of that as well.
So something I'm hearing too is that it is not as simple as these three racial categories, these four racial categories. We have class, we have immigration, we have location in the country, we have all kinds of dynamics that are happening, and even within a race, there's so many different experiences. And so a simple graph gets us started on the conversation, but it doesn't tell us all the answers. And that's one of the reasons, Camille, one more thing before we transition.
I just also want to say though that while we're talking about how it has to do with racism, I feel like the absence of Asian populations on those graphs is a kind of racism because it's invisibilizing the Asian populations in this state.
Yes. So the absence of someone on something like this is invisibilizing their experience. Yes. Yes, which is a common trope around Asian folks in this country, actually, is ignoring or invisibilizing. Thank you. So I do want us to, okay, Bernadette, one more.
It's not in response to that, but a general thing that I find interesting is actually the federal government used to track this data, racial disparities in incarceration by state, and they actually just stopped doing it in 2006, which I think says something about their priorities. So actually to even get this data, it was using a Census Bureau trick because the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is in charge of criminal justice data, stopped publishing it.
Thank you. So part of the reason, one of the big reasons that we did this activity at the beginning is because no one's an well, I'll say I'm not an expert in this room. I have a lot of the questions, and I know among all the people in this room we have a lot of knowledge and a lot of things to offer. And I think it's really great to get to talking to each other and learn things from each other and raise the questions that we either don't have the answers to or we do have the answers to. And in that spirit, I want us to continue our afternoon together of asking questions, bringing our knowledge, being humble to hear what people are saying, and learning as much as possible.
No, that's wonderful.
Great. And so I'm going to hand it off to Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform, the Roots partners in putting on this event. So who am I going to turn over to? Susie? Susie
So we have a little presentation for you, but I thought I would start and give you 5 minutes of the general landscape in Vermont. This is dry statistics, but I think since many folks may not really have any idea about the numbers that we're talking about, that it would be useful for you to know. So this isn't directing about issues, but you'll be able to pull out the issues, I think, from the people that I'm talking about. So I'm going to tell you about who is in jail in Vermont, behind bars, and why. And by the way, we have what's called a unified system. We have jail and prison. Jail and prison are two different things. Jail is where you are detained before you're charged, or after you're charged before you're sentenced, or it could be the place where you're sentenced up to a year. But in Vermont, they're the same place, and there's no distinction in most of the facilities in the folks who are there. Okay, so the total number of people, Vermonters, who are behind bars is, you think, above or below 2,000? 1,750. It's gone down over the past year from 2,000 to 1,750, just in the past, actually in the past 6 months since last summer. How many people, what would be your guess about the percentage of people who use a private attorney?
10.
Yeah, lower.
No.
3. 5%. 5% use a private attorney. 87% are represented by the public defense system, and somewhere around 10% are self-represented. What we used to call pro se, we now call self-represented litigants. Gender. So that's about class, right? This is poor people. 95% of people in the criminal justice system in Vermont are, relatively speaking, poor. Gender. How many women do you think? And let me say, so most people know these days that the U.S. has 25% of the world's prisoners and 5% of the world's population. The number of female prisoners in the world, we have 1/3 of the female prisoners of the total of the world. So we have even more than men. But how many in Vermont? Rough guess.
Too many.
Good answer. At the moment, between 150 and 175. There's one facility in Vermont. It's Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility, referred to as CRCF. It's in South Burlington. It can only hold about 175 people, and that's a great cap. And to your question about why do we ship people out of state? We don't have many other states, I don't know how many, if it's most, but many other states have private prisons in their states. Vermont has been good about saying, ixnay, no private prisons in Vermont. We have sent people out, but we're trying to obviously get rid of that practice. Race, so that's about gender, 150 to 175% people, about under 10% female. Race, 10% African American in the prison system. So this is about people in the prison system. Of the total people who are in jail, I was finding that graph a little confusing, but I think it's worth knowing that 1% of the population, roughly 10% of the people in jail. We have one of the highest rates of over-incarceration of people of color in the country. Out of state, we used to have 500 people out of state. Now we have 240 people out of state. That's since last summer. That's as a result of a variety of things. It's about 15%. Used to be up till the summer. Last summer CCA, Corrections Corporation of America. Boo. Now they're in a facility in Michigan that's owned by Geo Group. Used to be known as Wackenhut. Might be more familiar to some of you if you have followed this from a time. Out-of-state issue is a big issue. That's what we work with grassroots leadership with folks in Texas on, the out-of-state issue. And there's a booklet that we put together a year ago that has a whole bunch of information and quotes from inmates who've been out of state. 57% of the folks in Vermont's criminal justice system that's behind bars, I'm not talking about the, oh, by the way, we have 10,000 people under supervision total, but the behind bars population with mental health diagnoses, 53 to 57%. Now, we don't know, is that overdiagnosis, people who are over-medicated, or underdiagnosis, not recognized, probably somewhere in between. Estimated 99% of the women who are at Chittenden have a history of trauma. High percentage of the women have mental health diagnoses.
Sure,
It's considered 99 to 100% of the women in jail have a history of trauma. That's anecdotal, right? But that's what the people who work in the prison say. Detainees. So detainees are people who have been arrested and not charged, or arrested and charged but not sentenced. 400. So 20 to 23% more or less of people are people who are have not been sentenced of a crime. That's a really high percentage of people.
What percentage?
What percent? 20 to 23%. 400 people, roughly. Think about reducing the prison population. People who don't need to be there, right? That's what you should be thinking. Mental health issues, nonviolent. Poor people, it's how we turn up.
My friend's son spent a year in jail and then got let go with no charges. Man of color, of course.
Excuse me, does that population of people detained include undocumented workers who are facing deportation or not?
No, those people would not be in the state system. Those people would be in the federal system. Right. And I'm only talking about the state system. We do have some federal prisoners in Vermont because we rent a small number of beds to the feds because it's for reasons of sort of logistical convenience. But yeah, you were.
Of those 400 detainees, that's included in the 1750
Yes.
number?
Yes.
So, okay.
People locked up, talking about the total number. And then two more, finally, the violent versus nonviolent. 70% of the women are being held for nonviolent crimes, 30 to 35% of the men. And what that means in terms of numbers is about 120 of the women and 560 or 600, and for the men, 560 to 680 or something, let's say 650 to 700 total of total people that are being locked up for non-violent crimes. 650, 700 more or less. Oh, I skipped one. Oh, this is a big deal actually. There are 150 people, down from 200 to even up to as high as 240 as much as a year ago. Last summer it was about 200, now it's down to 150. People held for lack of approved housing. Now the narrative is sort of, there's not enough housing. No, we all know there's not enough low-income housing in Vermont. That's a fact, right? But this is lack of approved housing. And anecdotally there are, thank you, that means I have 1 minute. That means there are people, and I hear this regularly, we get a lot of letters from inmates and some from family members, that there are people who have housing, they've got 5 possible places to go, but their PO won't let them go to that place. Now sometimes there's a victim advocate who is opposing that. Somebody who was just let out was told she could get out, but she can't go to Rutland. Not her victim doesn't live in Rutland anymore, but some family members do, and they're really quite punitive. So they don't want her living in the county. So it took her a long time to find housing because everybody that she knows, all her family is in Rutland. This is the whole county, Rutland County. People are told they can't go to some place because it's a known drug area. It's a whole state. I know. Or because the person that they're going to live with their brother, and their brother has beer in the fridge, and the PO doesn't like that. Or there's a gun in the house, even though the crime may have had nothing to do, it was a nonviolent crime, had nothing to do with guns. But if it's a felony, they can't have a gun. The PO doesn't want them to have a gun in the house. A lot of Vermonters have guns in their houses.
Is housing one of the requirements for diversion, for the diversion program?
No.
I don't think so. It's not for
Diversion
diversion.
Diversion is before any, it's instead of going through a trial or something.
But so this is persons who come to you don't have to have had proof of housing in order to get into that program.
No,
Okay.
it's not up to, but I'm happy to tell you.
These are people who have reached their minimum sentence and they are otherwise in every way eligible for release, they are only being held, they're held past their minimum sentence to the cost of, by the way, $57,000 a year for men and $80,000 to $85,000 a year for women. So think, okay, lack of housing, you're being held for up to 2 years for lack of housing, and it's costing the state $88,000 a year to hold somebody in prison for lack of housing. Buy a house, right?
It sounds like Guantanamo.
Do you have any data on gender nonconforming?
No, we do not have data on that because the system doesn't track that. However, we do intend this spring to see what we can do to find out more about that. We know that there are people, trans people, in jail in Vermont. We know some of them personally, but how many people and how many gay people, we don't know. Okay, so I know my time is up. So we have.
Can I just clarify those stats again? All right, 1,700 people are in prison in Vermont. I thought you meant prisoners from Vermont,
No.
including prisoners shipped out. And
Yes.
did you say 250 Vermonter people who have been convicted of a crime committed in Vermont who are not in are in prisons elsewhere?
No,
250
1,750 people
in Vermont.
Total Vermonters, wherever they're from, they committed the crime in Vermont.
Right.
So I'm calling them Vermonters for the purpose of this. They're incarcerated by the Vermont system. Of those people, 250 are in Michigan. So there are 1,500 people. So Vermont has the capacity, let me say this more clearly. Thank you for clarifying, asking this question so I could clarify. Vermont has the capacity to house 1,500 people behind bars,
So there are
incarcerated.
1,500 people now, or
In the state. 1,750 people behind bars, 250 of them are in Michigan. 1,500 are in
Is
the state.
Michigan the only other place? Because
Yes.
like I know somebody.
State system. You might be thinking of some people who are in the federal system who could be wherever. Yeah, so if you are processed, if you commit a crime and you're processed in the federal system, like a high-level drug crime or something that has jurisdiction in 2 different states, you're probably in the federal system. This is complicated stuff. I guess my time's up, but I'll just, a few more questions, Chris.
Just one more question.
Yeah.
The 400 people that are detained are part of that 1,750.
Yes.
But they have often either not had their trial yet or had a trial but are not sentenced.
Right.
But they're housed in the same conditions and the same level of
Yes.
punishment and the same rules and regulations as people who are sentenced.
Yes.
400 people.
Yes.
And that could be up to a year or more in some cases, or?
Yeah.
What's the
It could be
law-
several years.
What's the maximum that you can hold somebody pre-trial in the state?
I don't know if there is a legal maximum. I don't believe that there is. I think there are some standards that people can litigate that they've been held beyond the standard, but I don't think there is a maximum legal time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Curtis.
For the 1,750 that are, how many have as their home of record someplace outside of Vermont?
Vermont doesn't track that either. We don't know that. Yeah. And unfortunately, the person who has been compiling this very wonderful collection of facts and figures, it's about that thick when it's printed out, has retired, and the Department of Corrections is not replacing that job. There's somebody else who's had that responsibility, but we're going to have many fewer, something for the legislators to know. I'm sure it will be well done, but we'll have access to much less information, which is too bad. Somebody, is she recording? Somebody else?
Right here.
Oh, yeah.
Do people who are considered forensic admissions to inpatient psychiatric facilities count in that data as being held as incarcerated? Or are they out extra to the rest of the incarcerated?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I would think so, because they have sentences, right?
Some of them are being held indefinitely until they are going through their trials or their legal processes.
If they're not sentenced, if they're people who've been found incompetent to stand trial still, they would not be, because these are people who are...
Or they haven't yet been found incompetent, that they're being...
Okay, yeah, don't know. Really good question, yeah. All right, so I'm going to stop so that we can have our panel. You guys can hear from other people in the presentations. Anna, Stories Project. Stories
So at Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform, we do a lot
We do advocacy. We work closely with families. We orchestrate, which I'd be happy to give anyone information about. We orchestrate a closed Facebook group for family members or loved ones with incarcerated person in their family and organize some meetings. We really focus on education and advocacy. Vermont should be angry. People don't notice, people don't think about it. People who are incarcerated, it's become invisible and it's inexcusable. So given that a big piece of our mission is education, we started this Stories Project, which is really to uplift the voices that are not heard. So today we're going to give you a little snapshot of that. So anyone who would be willing to read something aloud, raise your hand. These are numbered from 1 to 10. Sure, that'd be awesome. So these are numbered from 1 to 10, and they've all been passed out. We're going to take probably, I think it'll be about 8 minutes, and we're going to read through all of these. These are excerpts of letters that we have received. One of the things that we do is we correspond with a lot of people by mail and also via email. So, when they're all passed out, whoever has one can start.
I'll start. Yes. Stephen Kenny, Northern State Correctional Facility. I'm an addict, and DOC has not offered me or gave me any help to beat this addiction. I've spent 18 years in prison, and I haven't learned any trades. I tried to get into VCI, Vermont Correctional Industries, at Northern State Correctional Facility in Newport. And once I got into VCI, they sent me out of the state, even after I requested to stay in state, so I could learn a new trade. And I also requested to do the Discovery Program, when they had it, to address my drug problem, and was told no, and then sent out of state.
So this is from Douglas Huntley, who's incarcerated in Kentucky. I did find an apartment in January 2014, but right when I thought things were going my way, my parole officer called the landlord of the apartment, and after a conversation with him, the landlord no longer wanted to rent the apartment to me. I was sent down here to Beattyville, Kentucky, because I had a lack of housing. I am still here trying to get released from prison.
This is from Joe Bruette in Kentucky. I'm in segregation. I believe it's retaliation. In all of my time in prisons, I've never had a CO blow a fuse on me like this one. He screamed at me louder than a drill sergeant and tried to provoke me, screamed I was a pussy in front of a day room of prisoners, told me to swing at him, and many other things I won't repeat. Then he wrote me up and said I made an aggressive move towards him. All I did was ask to get out of the door to go to the law library and asked him why he was screaming at me. It sent him off more.
This is from Victor Hall, who's in Michigan. Every Christmas, this was written on December 25th, 2015. Every Christmas, I am swept up in the spirit of things. I continue to feel the glow of kindness and goodwill at its apex this time of year. I thrill inwardly to even the corniest holiday movies and music and even commercials. And I think in each and every one of you with warm fondness and deeply loving wish that you all find comfort and happiness delivered to you in massive quantities from every direction. Party heartily this Christmas and have the grooviest New Year ever. Merry Christmas from the Vic Cage at the Man Zoo. P.S. 2 words of decorating advice. Tinsel and more tinsel.
This is from Sean Briers, June 20th, 2015 in Michigan. Thankfully, Vermont DOC changed their tune on property being sent out. Unfortunately, it was too late for 60 or so inmates from South Durham who had already been packed up at that point. Many with no personal money to send anything out simply had to have it destroyed. The property, had all been compacted by the time Vermont agreed to pay shipping costs.
Ryan Brink, Michigan. I was in the first bus. The convoy was led by 2 Kentucky State Police. Lights flashing, a police helicopter complete with searchlights on scanning the route ahead. Our convoy consisted of more than 30 vehicles, including 3 armored vehicles with machine guns mounted on top, one with an armored turret. When we got to an intersection, we found that traffic had been stopped by armed police. I mean armed with assault weapons and body armor. It felt more like a convoy in Iraq or Afghanistan than here in the United States of America. A lot of us with experience in prison transports stopped drinking a day before so we wouldn't be forced to use the awful toilets, and because being handcuffed and chains on our ankles, it's just too hard. So now we're here with fewer jobs. And the ones lucky enough to get a job get half the money that they made in Kentucky. And to add insult to injury, we pay more than twice the prices in the Kentucky commissary, stretching our very meager allowance and becoming a bigger burden on our family's pocketbook. Or more than likely, it's going to have the stronger inmates preying on the weaker ones, or older inmates. So I leave you to ponder our existence here in purgatory, shipped far away, most forgotten and unhappy, and all doing dead time, no rehab, and little to no education.
Are there any more that haven't been read?
Shane Fleming from Michigan. In June 2015, prior to leaving Kentucky and getting shipped to Michigan, myself and 7 other individuals were removed from the general population and segregated in the hole for approximately 1 month. We were not segregated for a disciplinary reason, nor were we ad-segged by the administration. We were deposited in the hole without any due process and kept there until we transferred. Upon arriving in the Michigan, we were again segregated and kept for 4 more days until Geo Group realized there was no apparent reason for our segregation to begin with. The worst part of this injustice was that for about 6 days prior to leaving Kentucky, the water in all our cells was shut off, meaning the toilets are not flush and no fresh drinking water. The only liquids came with our meals, and yes, the toilets were overflowing with human waste. Animals in a shelter are treated better than we were.
Cynthia Charbonneau, 1/28/2015, CRCF.
That's the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility, the women's facility.
My PO ended up violating me because I didn't get into contact with her. I was having a C-section and was in the hospital for 4 days. My PO ended up putting a warrant out, and I was arrested at the hospital on the 4th day after my surgery and the birth of my daughter. I was released at the courthouse because she realized that I was in the hospital. So I lived with my mother and 2 daughters in Virgins. I had to get a job only because welfare took all my reach up. So I started working, and my PO had violated me again because I couldn't stay at my mother's house every single night and day. My PO told me that I'm going to jail no matter what for not being at my mom's house. I'm now stuck in jail with this pregnancy. I'm detoxing now since Christmas morning. They won't upper my meds. Since then I have been having major pains, cramps, my body hurts all day, every day. They don't give me hardly any food at all. They know I'm losing weight bad. I'm spotting blood off and on. I have not seen a provider, a real baby doctor, since I've been in jail. They told me I was 12 weeks when I got here. Then a week later that I'm 16 weeks. I don't know really how far along I am at all. I have a history of losing babies. I'm being treated majorly differently and very inhumane. I'm scared for my unborn child life being in here, and I don't know what to do.
Okay. This is James W. Carew, Jr. Yes, this is a poem. Yesterday is gone, today is what we make it, the future is ours. A stinging heartache, another drop of tears, no more I love yous. A barbed wire fence, a guard at every corner, there's no place like home.
So now another piece of the Stories Project is we also film brief clips of people telling their story. So we're just going to show you maybe 3 of those. This is where you might need to.
If anybody needs to shift that way.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, just to tilt it a little bit this way. That's great. Thanks.
Thank you, Mel.
I just think I pulled this over too. They're not much space. I'm moving it to
Alright, try that.
Yeah.
Alright. This is Bob.
Born in .06 while on probation. I was sent to the prison prison in Kentucky first. After I did 2 years down there without any mistakes or any DRs or anything, they shipped me back to Vermont to go home. The night before I was supposed to go home, I rented my apartment, got the lazy gas turned back, it was October. They sent me to Newport, Vermont, to do 6 more months of programming. But I lost the $500 on my apartment and the lights and gas money I had turned on with. And they didn't give me that back. When they released me from Newport again after another 2 years, or another year I was up there, they wouldn't let me come back to my hometown Burlington. They made me go up to my niece's house in Lowell, Vermont. And then they turned around and told me I had to go from Lowell to Newport twice a week for classes. There was no buses, no transportation whatsoever from Lowell to Newport. And I asked them, well, how am I supposed to get there? And they said, well, if you don't get there, you gotta go back to jail. So they brought me back to jail for another 8 months. So they decided to let me come here to Burlington where I can walk to the business house. I mean, the business house to the groups, which I still do the groups, but it was to lock me up for another year because I couldn't make the groups. They knew in the first place I couldn't make the groups, so they put me there on top of Mountain Road. It just doesn't make no sense that they keep bringing people back in for something that I didn't violate, I didn't do anything, any of that. I just couldn't make it there because that's where they stuck me.
Meg.
My name is Meg McCarthy. My husband is incarcerated at Southern State Correctional Facility in Vermont. Up until November of 2014, he was housed at Lee Adjustment Center, a facility owned and operated by Corrections Corporation of America. In June of this past year, he came down with a sore throat and it just wouldn't go away. After 2 rounds of antibiotics, the facility staff down there did some tests and it was determined that he had some form of cancer. While Kentucky didn't want tests, Vermont DOC was determining whether or not he would come back to Vermont for treatment or stay in Kentucky. In the end, they decided to bring him back to Vermont, but then he had to wait a few weeks for a transport bus. And finally, right before Thanksgiving, this past year, he began treatment in Vermont, nearly 6 months after first showing signs of cancer. Would he have been treated any sooner if he had remained in a Vermont prison the whole time? I don't know for sure, but I suspect so. His ordeal has not been easy. He's shackled when he goes to the hospital. He's not allowed to have family with him when he goes to doctor's appointments or chemotherapy treatment. And through the whole ordeal, I've not been able to hug him or even hold his hand. I don't know how anybody can fight cancer while they're in prison. There are so many things Vermont can do to make the criminal justice system more humane, more effective, and save taxpayer money in the process. I hope to see some of these changes come to light. Thank you.
I'm going to show one more.
My name is Janice Hutt, and I support bringing prisoners back from private facilities back to Vermont. My brother Bobby was an inmate in Vermont for many years. He was shipped to a facility in Kentucky and then moved to the facility in Arizona. For months and months and months, he complained about leg pain and was told over and over again that he was just med seeking. Last Thanksgiving, he got up out of bed and his femur snapped in two. So they brought him to the hospital to get a rod in his leg, sorry. And although the prison knew that day that he had the rod put in place, that he had cancer, osteosarcoma, he was never told for another month, which means all of his treatment and so on and so forth was delayed by that time. All of this could have been resolved with a different outcome had he been treated right the first time. We did finally get him back to Vermont, but it was too late by then. He did undergo chemotherapy several times and subsequently passed on October 27th.
Very devastating, infuriating stories. It is a lot to process. I do want to end with saying that there are changes happening and there is organizing happening. We have seen the numbers in the last year go from 500 to 241 of our out-of-state population, which is 50% decrease. And also, like Susie said, we've gone down by about a third in our people being held daily for lack of approved housing. Likewise, there's going to be a number of bills introduced this year, which you'll probably hear about more on the panel. But what I want to say is if you're interested in getting involved in what we do, we have a petition here, which is one way to sign up for our email listserv, which is our locked up and shipped away petition, that you do not believe that Vermonters should be shipped out of state and that we shouldn't be supporting the GEO group, funding the GEO group with our tax dollars. We also have an email sign up. We shoot to send out one email every couple weeks, so it's not going to be an influx, but it's the most important things that are happening. It's news, it's events, it's important stories, and it's progress. And also, if you're interested in being involved, I'm the outreach coordinator. I'm Anna. My email is anna@vermontersforcriminaljusticereform.org, spelled out. There are ways to be involved. We always have a little volunteer opportunities list running in our office. So please be in touch, and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform, for being here and presenting. Next, we are going to move into the next portion of our event, which is the panel, which is to take some of these stories that we've been hearing and bring them to life in this room. Rather than give you a 5-minute break, what I'm going to say is take care of yourself as you need to. This next 2 minutes is a good time to get up and stretch, but I've actually found in the past that when we say 5-minute break, it means people leave. It's hard to bring people back in, so we're just going to take a couple minutes to transition to get the panel up here, and then we're going to really get started in a couple minutes to make sure that we really have a chance to hear everything that the panelists have to say. So I'm going to introduce our panelists, and the question that each of the panelists is going to answer is the following. What is the most important thing you would like us to know about mass incarceration, about your experience and or what you think we need to focus on for change. And so some folks up here have been incarcerated or have incarcerated family members and are activists. Everybody up here is an activist in a different way, making change, organizing, but some people have direct experience and some don't. So they're going to get the choice of how they want to address that question. So what is the most important thing you would like us to know, either about your experience and or what you think we need to focus on for change? So our panelists are Sha'an, Navab, Dara, and Becca. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves and then respond to the question. We're going to start with Sha'an. Thank you.
Is this 5 minutes or?
5 minutes.
Okay.
And you know, if you need more, then you need more. But I'll give you like a little signal.
Right, 1 minute, okay.
Great.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes.
Yes, I thought it was such a great one.
It's a long one. And thanks to
All
Susie,
right.
I think it was Susie that came up with it. I think it's really good.
So, thank you. It was a good way to start. So Susie, who did introduce the question, I was introduced to Susie because my son was incarcerated and he was in Kentucky. And I've been a social justice activist for years and was not able to find any people who wanted to do anything, including the organization that I was working with. And so got involved with the Locked Up and Shipped Away campaign, and I am now on the board. I grew up in a working class family. We didn't know anybody who had gone to jail or to prison. There was alcoholism and mental illness in my family. And as a result of that, my life had started to take a very destructive path. And but for grace am I here today. And I purposely said I will never be behind bars again, and embraced the American dream, and in that got a successful position according to our American dream and was moving along happily. Adopted a child. New York City, which is where I was living, was not safe anymore, and decided to move up to Vermont, which many of us move up to Vermont because of quality of life. And that's why I moved up. My son had educational, academic issues, as well as some mental health issues. That besides him being involved with the human service or mental health system since 2nd grade, nothing worked. When my son was incarcerated, I had no clue of the ramifications and how that would affect. So not only lasting apart whatever ideology I might have had about who I am, you know, as an educated person who's trying to contribute into this American society. And in that, before my son went to prison, I had been working with the African American Alliance in the Northeast Kingdom, and so had visited many Black men in jail. So I knew the system, I knew it well. I was actively trying to keep my son out of the system. The fact that he was in the system and then ended up in Kentucky, and some of the things that I never thought about. I never thought about having to explain to grandchildren that their son is in jail. I never thought about what it's like when all of your friends and people, I've been living in Vermont since '83, talk about their children. And you have absolutely nothing to say. I never talk about how the many hats I have to wear. And although I may have received the Presidential Medal of Distinction from Lyndon State College, when I walk through those doors in Springfield, They don't give a darn who I am. I am looked at as the mother of that criminal. And what did I do wrong? My son, everything that has been shared here, I've heard, except for the women's experience. My son wrote to Black and Pink. And he started out with, hey, to all my LGBT family. And he goes to ask, how's everybody doing and stuff. And he talks about how he's been in prison for 8.5 years. And in the county jail, and as has been told, there's no distinction. And he's heard about many inmates dying. But this is the first time he heard about a gay inmate dying. And he didn't know Pat, but he wished he had, because he would have tried to talk to him and to be a friend. Today he spoke to a female correctional officer that day, and he had been hearing about the things that Pat had dealt with and the harassment he suffered, and it brought tears to his eyes. When he was in a different, this was in Lee, he used to get harassed 24/7 by other prisoners, by other correctional officers, and he had to fight. He had to put up a facade so other inmates wouldn't harass him and bully him. Have you any idea, as the mother who has been dedicated for racial justice, who has put herself out there? My son's adopted. I wanted him. I moved up here for him. I changed my life. And to be sitting here in this room is obscene. It is criminal. We are not humane. Please stop fooling yourself. The facade that we have to wear, that I have to wear, the stress, what does that do for our health? I don't know if I'm close to my time, but I just wanted to just quickly, am I close to it? I'm involved with AmeriCorps, and so AmeriCorps, which I have had to struggle with, it's their big Martin Luther King Day, and it's amazing how we can move away from what he stood for and how they have co-opted it for service. And so, for me, who didn't go to Washington, but knew people who did go to Washington, and at 15, at 20, at 25, I had promise. At 67, I'm scared to death because it's gotten worse. And so as we celebrate Dr. King, just want to leave you with, and this was from Springfield College, my alma mater, commencement speech in '64. The time is always right to do right. When will that saying become obsolete? And so I leave you with, I want to celebrate. I want us to have a criminal justice system that adequately manifests our beliefs, our goals, and what we want to pass on to our kids. Thank you all for
Thank you for starting us off. I'm going to pass it on to Dara. Do you have the question in front of you, or do you want it from me?
Oh, yeah, let me have the question.
Dara.
Gonna extemporize anyway, aren't we? What is the most important thing you would like us to know about mass incarceration? That's in brackets. About your experience and or what you think we need to focus on for change. All right, I started working in the criminal justice system in another state in 1978, so I have like 40 plus years of experience. Right now, a lot of it was as a public defender, so you look at your story time now. I got stories. Boy, do I have stories. And I worked in another state. That was a state where this whole thing about nationally estimated 5.85 million Americans felony disenfranchisement. I lived through that. I worked through that. I worked in the fields of the new Jim Crow for a long time. So in the town I was living in, that was in Maryland, I helped establish a community mediation service, helped establish a drug court in that town, that county. My wife and I moved to Vermont about 11 years ago. I've been a volunteer at the Community Justice Center since then. I originally got into it for mediation, but that seemed to have dried up a little bit. And so right now we're running reparative panels and circles of support and accountability. The latter thing is to assist people who have recently been released from prison to situate themselves in the community. And so when it was either Susie it was Susie talked about housing being a problem. Yeah, that is a problem. That's the bottleneck. We have serviced people who've stayed in prison long beyond their men who could have been released. So we help people get readjusted to living in a community. Part of the purpose is to get them reintegrated so they're not on their own out there and feeling like the only thing they can do is really go commit another crime. So it makes the community safer too. And it just helps people. We're helping people. I've gotten to be an old guy now. I certainly have my opinions about things. I'm not personally a believer in grand causes as much as I am in actually dealing with individual people and helping them. And so I think what we're doing at the Justice Center, that's exactly suitable for our volunteers, and I'm happy doing what I do there. We have about 40 volunteers there, actually. We have a good number of volunteers helping us. So, I actually was thinking of Martin Luther King today, too. I was the Riverside Baptist speech. That was a speech he gave 1 year and 10 days before he was shot in Memphis at Riverside Church in New York City. It's a wonderful speech. It's the last major speech that you'll see in his library. But it's a speech against the Vietnam War. That's how it's usually labeled. But in fact, he starts talking about racial and class injustice. And not just in racial terms. He made the switch over to saying this is really a class problem, not a race problem. So in any event, I'd recommend that speech to y'all. So, that's it.
So then we're going to do Becca. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Becca Ballin. I'm one of 2 state senators here in Windham County. I live here in Brattleboro with my wife and 2 kids who go to Green Street School, which is right up the hill here. And I really got involved in this movement for 2 reasons. One is because of a phenomenal woman sitting here with us in this room who was on the video clips, and that's Meg McCarthy, who so many of you know Meg, and Meg did the website when I was running for Senate. I got to know Meg through that process. And Megan, another constituent of mine that lives in my neighborhood who has a son incarcerated in the federal system, the two of them have been wonderful about sharing with me the experience of what it is like to have a loved one incarcerated. And through my job as a senator, often make calls on behalf of constituents regarding conditions in prisons, regarding the way people who are incarcerated or are on release are treated by their probation officers. And there are many good people who work for the state of Vermont. And there are also some people who are quite jaded in their work. And Meg and Susie both know that I have been discouraged by some of the phone conversations I've had with people through Department of Corrections and the ways in which they talk about not just the folks who are incarcerated, but the families of those who are incarcerated. There's a lot of work to be done there, and I'm eager to do that work. The other reason I'm involved in this movement is because someone very dear to me is someone who struggled with mental illness his entire life. And I know that if he weren't middle class and he weren't white, he would be incarcerated. I feel that most clearly and sincerely. We have so many people that we're incarcerating that are struggling with mental health issues and addiction. And we don't want to look at the reality of what that means, not just for them, but for the families. The suffering that happens with families when they know that their loved ones are not getting the treatment and the services that they need and deserve. So Susie was encouraging me to share with you two bills that I'll be introducing, and I know Molly Burke, who is a local rep here in Brattleboro, wanted to be here, but she's out of town. She has companion bills in the House, but you should be watching the progress of Senate Bill 206 and 207. I'll just briefly read what each of those bills will be addressing. And there are at least one other bill, at least by Barbara Rachelson, who's a rep from Chittenden County. So Senate Bill 206, the subject is corrections, probation, parole, and furlough conditions. And the bill proposes to limit the imposition of conditions of parole, probation, and furlough to restrict otherwise legal behavior of the person under supervision, to prohibit revocation of probation, parole, and furlough for technical violations that are not actually new crimes. And we can talk about that more in the discussion period. But that's very important when you think about folks who are trying desperately to turn their lives around, and we set conditions of parole that are pretty impossible for anyone to meet. The second one, S207, is a bill to establish a judicial procedure to allow for compassionate release of certain inmates. And again, we can talk about the details later. But I'm very proud to be here, and we have a lot of work to do. Rebecca Navab.
Hi. Well, I wasn't expecting to be speaking to this many people, so I'm really happy to see so many people here, that people care about this issue, this topic. I think it's probably about time more people hear more and more about it, and I would encourage everyone to please keep up this work and keep the message going. I've been around people who've been incarcerated much of my life, but I was incarcerated myself a little over 3 years ago, and spent 11 months in prison in Vermont. And I'd say that just about everything I've heard here today was very well reflected in my story, and it's certainly a profound, I guess trauma is the best word that it can do to somebody. It's difficult. The temptation is to want to go the usual prisoner thing of like defend myself, that I didn't deserve this or I didn't deserve that, and I still don't think I deserved it, and I didn't. but and you know, I mean that's everybody's story, and you know, the more I look at it, the more that might be true for everybody. And you know, and so it's, but I think that things have to change from that perspective, almost initially, the prevention angle of why can't we create communities where people aren't feeling the need for crime or violent behavior or whatever, you know, whatever ridiculousness that people are incarcerated for. You know, the laws, you know, for example, again, I don't want to go back to my own case too much, but I was given a plea bargain of 6 days of community service or a felony, and if I didn't take the plea bargain, and I felt justified that I didn't do the crime, and as well, to be honest, I thought the state is really going to spend like $100,000 on a trial to convict me of whether I was standing here or standing there 12 feet away, and at a Little League baseball game, my son's Little League game. I was, boy, I'll stop now. But at any rate, somehow to the deafness of somebody, I lost the trial, and I was sentenced to, according to the recommendations of the Department of Corrections, that because I was in denial of my crime, that I needed to go to prison to do therapy there. And so, and as the thing progressed, I noticed that the way that system works is that the conservative side of the corrections wants the therapy there, but it wants it to be dysfunctional so they can say, see, you guys we don't need to rehab these people, we need to just keep them locked up. The out-of-state thing, many times if you go to a therapy group and you don't want to go along with what they want you to do, well, we're firing up the bus for Kentucky out there, you know, at that time, you know, it's the biggest, you hear all the stories of what prison is like, but the biggest and hardest thing about it is the isolation and estrangement from your family, from your community. Again, if those things, if somehow we can empower our communities, empower our families, so that they don't have to go through this type of estrangement, it'd be so much better. On the inside, there's so much more that can be done. A friend of mine was recently incarcerated, and I went to Springfield for my first time. I'd been back there since I'd been released from there, and things were pretty much the same, except for they put in solar panels all over now, which is great, awesome. They should have solar panels. They should have gardens there. You know, why can't prisoners are not even allowed to have gardens? You know, to grow their own food. This facility in Windsor has a beautiful sugar bush. They used to have farming there. Why is that not happening? You know, where I was in Newport most of the time, over the fence, you can see, you know, dairy farms everywhere, and you know, it's. I mean, I had a fairly cushy ride compared to most dudes, but it's isolating, and there's 3 layers of barbed wire. I couldn't climb over one of those, and I'm a rock climber. I climb ice. I would not go anywhere near that stuff, you know. And even if I could, and I know I'm going on, but the thing about it is there's a lot that can be changed in prevention. There's a lot that can be changed in the incarceration, and then the hardest time of all is when you get out. For me, this was the hardest time, and I don't think that I'm alone in that. One more thing about residency. I have one friend who is a Native American that they kept him in 2 extra months. How much is that? You know, because they found a bow and arrow in the attic of his camp that he was being able to use. He would have been approved except for they found a bow and arrow. It's like, what? And but I mean, I was not allowed to live with my wife, who had been, who was not a victim at all of my alleged crimes. I had to go to a halfway house because they would not, even though I had the money, I had, you know, other places I could live, they wouldn't let me live there. I had to have a GPS bracelet, had to schedule everything I did every single day, hour to hour. In Vermont, they have the furlough system. I'm not sure how many other states have a furlough system. I've heard only Ohio, but it's very difficult. It's almost impossible to not violate. I know people that ran away and got violated just because it was easier to be in prison than to be on furlough. And, you know, fortunately for me, I'm lucky and somewhat privileged, whatever that means, and I've gotten through this. Right now, my friend that was recently incarcerated got taken to Indiana. As far as I know, I don't know where he is, but that's the type of thing that happens. Is people just anything can happen, and there's all kinds of stuff that goes on. And I don't think Vermonters really want to be a part of that. One of the reasons why we have been shipping people out of state is because nobody wants the prison in their town. You know, even if it does make you money, it's not, you know, Vermonters don't want to be a prison state, but, you know, I think that it's time that we step up and become aware that we are that. We are that. We are there. Vermont has way too much white supremacist attitude, whatever that means. I grew up here and I thought that we were also clever and classless and free, like, you know. But no. And I found out firsthand, and I'll stop now, but thank you. Thank you for
Thank you. Thanks everyone on the panel today. And before we open it up to the audience to ask questions, I just want to give you guys a chance to respond to each other, because I know sometimes, like when I'm on a panel, I'll share and then realize something someone else said sparked my thinking and I want to talk with them. So if there's anything that came up that you all want to address.
Just takes a lot of courage to speak from the eye. It just does. So thank you.
So what I want to do is open it up for Q&A. Sheila is going to be helping me facilitate that.
So if you all can just raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and just maybe blurt out your name when you raise your hand, and I'm going to just be taking stack, and Mel will be calling on people. And if people could, I know a lot of people have a question with a comment, that's fine. So if you have a brief comment and a question, then that would help the process move along. But if you just raise your hand and I can mark you down, then it'll be great. Name?
Sheila.
Great.
Hi, Sheila.
I like it. That's right. Anyone else? So far? Okay, so let's kick it off. Go ahead.
Okay. I actually have two things that I want to ask any of you to comment on. One is about racial profiling, and I would also add in profiling around other issues, LGBT or whatever. What do you know about what's happening with profiling in this state and what's being done about it? And the other question is about plea bargain stuff, because you mentioned that, and I know because I have a friend in New Hampshire who's incarcerated that is just a horrendous nightmare piece of the puzzle. So either of those.
I'll talk a little bit about the racial profiling. So as I had said, this is back in 1998 is when we started. The African American Alliance was one of the few places at the time as a resource that people would contact. And besides my personal experience, in other words, me seeing store owners act differently, law enforcement act differently, that we would get these constant anecdotal stories from people being told to go get up against the wall in their driveway, the IBM personnel. So for us, it was a big thing. I myself have been stopped. I'm telling my son one time about it, and then I get stopped. There was a report that had come out, this was about 5 or 6 years ago, that around racial profiling. And the report said that they really didn't see any differences at the time. What came out subsequently was they were looking at those that they were stopping and arresting or giving tickets. They were not including those that they were just stopping. So we were looking at, if we have body cameras, that might have something to do. But if you know anything about terrorism and what that does to people when they see law enforcement. So the racial profiling, I'd like to say it's been changed. They're looking at doing another study. You might know something more about that, but we're not all on the same page. And I know law enforcement, we were at a multicultural conference in November, and law enforcement is getting better on it. But they reflect the attitudes of people, and a black person is suspicious.
So just to follow up on that quickly, so for my constituents, I'll be serving on the Bias-Free Policing Committee, and that's going to be chaired by Captain Ingrid Jonas, and that first meeting under her leadership will be in the next week and a half or so. I have to check my calendar, but it's coming up. And I will, for those of you who know, I write a column weekly in the Reformer. I'll be letting everybody know what comes out of that Bias-Free Policing Committee. So.
Did you want to call
Did you have a question, or you wanted to address something?
Add to that.
Sure.
May I?
Yes.
The state of Vermont has made some progress in requiring the police to adopt bias-free policing. The police doesn't like that name, so it's now called fair and impartial policing policies. And the Attorney General's office has a policy, and the state police have a policy, and all the law enforcement are supposed to have a policy, and if they didn't, it's by default, it would be one of those two policies. And this committee is involved in looking and trying to make a better policy. So there are policies now, but there's not required training, so there will be also legislation introduced by Bill Lippert, representative from Heinsberg, that will be taken up to kind of further this work in this session, and it requires training, that the law enforcement actually have training in bias-free policing. It's not enough just to have policies. Thank you
for that. There was another question in there about plea bargaining. What can you, just about plea bargains in general?
I wondered, if anybody had any comments about, or knew anything about reform of that whole, because that's just such a...
Does anyone have a sense of that?
Apparently, before the Civil War, most cases went to trial. I read this somewhere recently, but it's like since, that time the court system has gotten so overloaded. How do we know this? Look at all the number of people we got in jail. If you want less plea bargaining, pay for more prosecutors and pay for more public defenders. You don't want plea, if that's, you don't want plea bargaining, it's 90% of what happens in the court.
And I don't think most people understand that plea bargaining is really arbitrary in the way that it functions and so forth, and I don't think most people who are up against it know how horrendous it is and how unpredictable it is and so forth. And that if you refuse your plea bargain, then it's a license to throw the book at you. That's what it is.
Better car salesmen and poker players than other people.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Navad, did you want to address that too?
The plea bargain system is, I understand what Dara's saying, does kind of eliminate, if everything went to trial, would be, you need a lot more. I really kind of was feeling something more. I just wanted to anecdotally touch the race issue again as far as the criminal justice system. From my anecdotal experience, you know, basically the criminal justice system is like an amplification of our whole culture and all, especially of the less attractive things of our whole culture. And whatever, you know, poverty is amplified in prison. You have to pay 22 cents for a creamer for your coffee if you're lucky enough to get one. So you can imagine the type of racism that goes on in the prison system and in the criminal justice system. I moved to a new unit. I was new. You usually get the top bunk unless you have a lower bunk to pass. The guard insisted that I get the lower bunk. Found out my roommate was black. What a surprise. The guard is telling me I have to take the lower bunk. What? You know? And there's just a million examples like that all through the whole system.
And I'll just tag on, all of the men that I visited in prison were told by their lawyers to take a plea. These were sexual assault. And they said, because most of the complaints were white women, and they said, you will not get a fair trial in the state of Vermont if a black man assaults a white woman. So your own lawyer is encouraging.
I had two people here, but is it regards to this question?
No.
Okay, so you're next as well.
I, more than a question for Vermont, I don't know if there's any, but I come from Texas, and in Texas a lot of the way immigration works, I think that's throughout the U.S. You know, if a person is found that is undocumented, they get sent to this prison. It's prisons that families go in, and I don't know if there's any in Vermont, but I know that there's in Texas there's few giant ones. There's one in Minnesota, and I just want to mention that there are hundreds of families that are living in prison, and talk about a marginalized portion of the society that doesn't even sometimes speak the language. And I'd just like to, if you want to comment or anything, right?
I think on a large scale, for-profit prisons are generally, most detainees in for-profit prisons are on immigration charges, and although for-profit prisons are part of the problem that we're looking at in Vermont, as with those other states, that in the big picture there's a lot more than just that going on. I mean, they're all basically for profit. I used to say to guards, oh, you're afraid you're going to run out of prisoners,
Other thoughts about immigrant detention and how it relates to Vermont?
Can I add, I just want to make sure people know that it is the fastest growing prison population in the country is the immigrant population. And that is partly driven by the fact that the private prison industry drives that legislation at the federal level.
And they have quotas. They have to fill beds.
Deb? So my question is, I'm sorry, what's your name again? You worked within the system?
Dara, D-A-R-A-H, Dara.
Dara, I'm just wondering, based on your experience, what percentage of those incarcerated individuals have substance abuse and mental health problems?
Okay, first of all, you have to appreciate most of my experience has actually been in another state, and it was extensive. I practiced as a public defender here in Vermont for about 6 years before I ran out of gas.
Well, could you speak about that as in terms of your work as a public defender?
Yeah, in general, oh shoot. It's a lot. I remember standing in front of a judge one day, and he looked at me and he just said, 80% of the people that are walking through here have some substance abuse, alcohol problem, and a lot of them there's mental illness. And, I mean, he even recognized that you deal with it as best you can. Right now in Vermont, last I can recall, a few years ago when I retired, there were fiscal restraints, financing restraints in terms of the budgetary allowance for mental health treatment. While one particular judge in this county actually felt he had the authority to order evaluations, he didn't necessarily have the wherewithal to order someone into a mental health institution. And I had the sense he was talking about money, basically. I don't know if that got fixed. It should have been fixed, but you know, that was going on a little while ago.
You mentioned money. My first job in Vermont was as a substance abuse counselor, and everybody that I saw was court referred. At that time, we were using numbers like over 90%, and we were being conservative, of the people who were incarcerated had been under the influence in their incarceration. 25 years ago, we're sitting around the table talking about prevention and the cost. And the only difference is that the cost has gone up. So we have that information. One starts to ask the question, why haven't we moved forward? Why are people saying it costs this much money for prevention versus this much? How much it costs to incarcerate someone? And I'm not only talking about if they're in their house, but let's talk of the cost to that family. Let's talk to the cost to that community. How many services are those families needing to be engaged with?
We had run statistics, or actually tried to figure out the cost of running a drug court in this other place I worked, as opposed to the incarceration. The drug court was much more labor intensive, actually, in terms of supervision of the person we're dealing with. But the cost was a lot cheaper than putting someone in prison. So we did something. Nah, that's another story.
All right, Susie, who's our sort of like pseudo-panelist, is going to offer her chair up. And you have a lot of the information, so it seems important.
So I think it's important to understand that corrections is an uncapped line item, and mental health and every other area of state government is a capped line item. So you can see what the problem is here, right?
And, you know, ancillary to that is the problem of underfunding our judiciary for decades in Vermont. And it's not specific to Vermont, it happens nationally, but we have felt it acutely in Vermont, and I sit on institutions in the Senate. We've done a lot of work in the last year to try to rectify that, but it's a real problem.
I think one thing that the treatment programs that they have available for people are in a constant state of flux now too. There's different programming now than when I was there 2 years ago, and that was different than the 2 years before that. The Discover program, which was mentioned there, I don't even think that exists anymore, and they're constantly changing contractors, and it's amazing. It's like there's just that section of corrections is so dysfunctional, and there's so much money is wasted.
We had a meeting with some people from DOC. So in their area, they were talking about, they had AA people that were coming in. My son came up from Kentucky. He came up to do program, was not able to do program. Not able to do program because they can't find anybody to run the program. So besides those who they do, so if you stop and think about that, you know, when they do find, are they going to be doing best practices? Who is it that they're actually going to find? So these are some of these realities that we're not, you know, people are being stuck. Nothing is happening with that.
So I have Rosie that wants to respond to the data question, then it's going to be Daryl, then it's going to be you, and then I'm going to come back to you, Susie, okay? So Rosie, you wanted to respond to the data question?
Yeah, I was just going to say we're working with a new program which is funded by DOC, and it's called Pretrial Services, and they've been offering mental health and substance abuse screenings to anyone in the state who is arrested is eligible. right now, just for felonies, there's also pending legislation to add misdemeanors, which would be great. And they've been collecting data basically since October. So the data's not great because it's there's not a lot yet. But we've screened over 800 people in the state. And the results are pretty much what everyone in the mental health and criminal justice field has expected, which is roughly 80 to 90% of folks with substance abuse or mental health issues. And I was hoping I had the data on me, but I don't. But I think I can share it possibly. Also that we have 3 different screenings, one for substance abuse, one for mental health, and one for, it's like something that calculates a person's chance of recidivism, which we can talk about that. But what the data is showing is that a lot of folks have really high need, so a lot of substance abuse and mental health, but very low risk of reoffending. So that is helpful in the sense that it shows that we're putting a lot of people in prison that need services that aren't a danger to the community, is how they would frame it. I would frame it differently, but that's the data that we have now, and hopefully there'll be more, and hopefully it will be compelling. So, yeah.
Great. So, do you have a response to that, or do you want to be on stack?
Stack, thank you.
Okay, great. Daryl.
I really have a question for the senator, real quick. But before I said, okay, just to understand, I understand, like, you know, prison is not supposed to be vacation. You know, people, most of the time, are allegedly done wrong. But and also too, but yeah. So my main question is, who's hiring the people who run the prisons? It seems like like I lived in Dallas for a little bit, and I was homeless, and just thank God that it happened at the same time, but they had built this $50 million homeless shelter. It's called The Bridge. And it was like a college campus, okay? And one main thing with people living in shelters is that there's like a curfew. You have to be there, so it's like hard to find work. This place is Xanadu for homeless. There's no curfew, there's food, it's beautiful. And you could do whatever you want. And then 2 weeks later, all that changed because people just took advantage of it, and like there's a bunch of random stuff. So, I want to, like, I'm hearing a lot of stories about, like, just like, also too, to my man who was actually in the system. There were people there that really, they hired people who cared about what was going on, like the people there. And that this is unfortunate too. It's like, even still though, like they had to change it back to what is normal security because of whatever people. I mean, it was ridiculous. After a week, it went back. So what I'm saying is, who controls who do the wardens have to answer to? Who are hiring these people? Like, 'cause it seems like this story has been like since Shawshank Redemption. Like, it's the prison system. People go in there and it's messed up. It seems like if this was like Chipotle or some other company or something like that, then the people would have been changed or whatever. So who do they have to answer to? And like,
So I will just. So I'm halfway through my first term.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot I don't know, and I know Susie knows a lot more than I do about Susie Wizawati, who served in the House.
Right.
For years, and now
is that a state thing? That's what I'm saying. Does the state hire wardens? Yeah, right.
So I will say this though. This Wednesday, there's a House member, again from Brattleboro, Molly Burke, and I will be sitting down with the new Commissioner of Corrections in Vermont about a variety of concerns that we have related to policies that are in place that are not being followed on the ground level. And so the answer to your question is multi-layered. So you can have policy in place that makes sense, but if people on the front lines are not actually following those policies, then the policies aren't worth the paper they're printed on. So it's what we're trying to figure out is how the message is trickled down from the commissioner to the deputy commissioner and down the line to the folks on the front line delivering services and also interactions with families at home,
where's the breakdown? Why are the policies that make sense not being followed? And so we have, again, I go back to, it's a lot of getting up to speed and information gathering.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have more that you want to add in terms of your experience.
Actually, I don't know that, I understand exactly what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. They're people are state employees, they're hired through a state agency. And so, it's, some of them care more than others, yeah. Some of them are good and some of them, it's like any slice of population is my point of view. Some people are honest, some aren't, some are very intelligent, some are totally ignorant, Some people are good and some people just aren't.
Right. And that's what really, that's why I brought up the bridge thing, because it's scary. Because I'm like, these people really wanted to. They wanted to do something different. And that's why I wanted to touch you, my man. You've been inside. There's some you got to deal with. You're dealing with the worst of technical, quote unquote. I don't want to label, but you're dealing with some, troubled people. And I understood it after they put that on lockdown after a week. I would have done the same thing. So let's what do you guys like? That's what.
Something else I think I heard you say too is, in a different industry, if something wasn't working, it wasn't serving people, it would end. Or it would change. So what is it about the prison system that means that we're not changing it, even though it's not working for humans?
Even though that I felt involved with have friends and family that had some connection with the criminal justice system before I personally was, that I had no idea the impact of it until I was involved in it. And I'm really glad to see that so much more public awareness is starting to emerge now. It's amazing. It's like and that's what we need to do. People don't know that they can change, if we had Bill Belichick running the prison, it might be better, but he's not available for that job, But I'm just saying that people don't even know that we have that power. We're not empowered as individuals enough to know that we can make these changes, and that's what we need to. We've got to take the power back, really.
Great. So we're running out of time, and there are 4 people who are on stack, so I want to keep to the stack, and then we'll have to move on so people can get out of here in a reasonable time. So it's you next, then it's you back there next, and then we're gonna do Susie, okay? And okay, sound good? Go ahead.
All right. So I've been hearing talk about, a new prison being proposed in Bellows Falls. No? Yeah? Oh, okay. Anyway, so I was just curious what folks' thoughts were on that. And my second question was about working conditions for people in Vermont prisons, because I know that especially in private prisons, there's a lot of corporations that contract for labor and usually under horrible terms. So I was just curious what those conditions are like in Vermont.
So a proposal about the jail in Bellows Falls and prison conditions. 2 big ones.
Thoughts? This is a huge issue in Bellows Falls, and so I know that there are people from that community who were in the room. I don't know if they're still here, and I know the man who is spearheading the initiative would take umbrage with the term jail or prison, because he actually is a very forward-thinking individual. Sheriff Keith Clark is really thinking about it as a justice center, and there will be all kinds of services in his idea of what this will look like. There will be all kinds of services available to the folks who are in the center. So I just want to be clear that he would not, I just saw him up at the State House giving testimony before several committees the other day, and he would really like to move beyond classifying it as a jail, because he's thinking about something much more progressive than that. That said, there isn't a tremendous amount of support for it in Bellows Falls. Oh, there you are, Deb.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and so I don't know if you went to any of the community forums about it, because I was in Montpelier when they happened, and I don't know if you want to speak at all to
To be quite honest, I don't know that I could eloquently in any way.
Yep.
But I think my impression is that what's really upsetting to them is that they feel they have no voice in the process. And it is, and there are some contradictions because Keith has a wonderful vision, and I applaud him for trying to think of how to reform. And he knows quite well how much of this has to do with endemic poverty, substance abuse, and oppression. But however, you know, the funding of it comes from the system that is creating the problem. You know,
It's subsidized by the federal.
It's subsidized by the federal prison system, and I think he has a wonderful vision, but I just see all the contradictions as well, and it's like, where do we go from here? I know there's actual prisons in Finland that are beautiful that you would want to go and stay. Was it Norway? Yeah, I've seen that. You've seen that? Yeah, sunny, bright rooms, no bars, and those people are going there to take back their lives, to, you know, to correct the things that went, you know, wrong for them, to get the support in real cutting edge, meaningful ways.
And I just said, I lived up in Derby Line, Newport area, and went through when they first proposed building the prison there. They built it. I actually worked there. I worked as a teacher there. They had a garden there. There was some controversy on competition because they were going to be making furniture. Were they taking contractual work from a private enterprise? But one of the things that, if it had been considered, it wasn't public knowledge as to the strain that it would have on human services. They hadn't considered who might be coming up to live because they wanted to be close to that family member. And they may not be coming with all of those resources. So if you know anything about Newport, Newport is struggling. It is still it's like it keeps trying to pull something to take itself out, and it hasn't. So St. Johnsbury maybe is working a little differently, but.
One thing I want to just make sure that we think about is, even though this project proposed in Bellows Falls may not be right for that site, it may not be right for that community, I think it's really important for us to look at the components of the program that are worthy. And how might we model something, perhaps not exactly in that way, but also for all of us in Vermont to understand, we have got to all do our part to find a place. Was it 10,000 people who are currently under supervision? 10,000 Vermonters currently under supervision. They're living all around us. So they are our neighbors, they are our family members, and so we have to figure out a way forward. And this may not be the right way, but I appreciate that it's starting a more meaningful conversation.
Yes. So I have Fisher and HB over here who want to respond specifically to this question, and then we have to potentially start to wrap up. Go ahead.
So,
Fisher, HB, whichever.
Two fast things. One is that it's in the Reformer that there's a group of people in Rockingham that started a group called Rockingham for Progress that is working for Bellows Falls, Rockingham area. And a lot of the language I read on their website is super positive, and it's looking at zoning restrictions and getting around changing the Liberty Mill building into something different. So looking at actually getting at the prison issue this way. And the other thing is that I learned, and someone can correct me, something that so sheriffs in Vermont are able to personally gain income from prison projects up to 5% of the annual project. So I don't know the sheriff, but I do know that fact, and that the projections that I've heard have been $3 million annually would be coming into that project. So the sheriff can personally benefit up to 5% of that money annually. So that is a question that's a fact that I have learned, and that raises a significant number of questions to me of bringing in a $3 million project to this area when there's one person who stands to benefit in a substantial financial way. So,
I think to put it out there is I am someone that believes in prison abolition, that believes that there is a way in the future for us to not have to have prisons, and I also understand and believe in the importance of reform to get to that vision. So with that, for me, what is really hard about the Bellows Falls project and what I've read is this continuous conversation around the language being used of it being a justice center and not a jail. In my understanding, it is a facility that will house people against their will for criminal behavior. For me, that's a jail. I understand that it is a better jail, but it is still a jail. And what I think is even more frightening to me is that it is increasing the militarization and the prison system around issues of housing and issues of mental health by bringing them into a prison situation rather than saying, these are services that folks need. Let us go to people that are doing affordable housing, that are providing mental health services, and give them the money to do that project. But instead, it is now being overseen by the prison system. So those are two big things for me.
So it's your turn. Okay. This is going to be the last question.
Okay.
And we're sorry, that's all the questions we can fit in. I know there were other people on the staff. We're putting a lot on you to close us out.
Sure. So I would just like to see more folks facing criminalization and more folks in the free world find more ways to answer and to interrupt the rhetoric that speaks as if ordering people into mental health treatment or institutions is not a form of incarceration and is not a form of civil rights and human rights violation. And secondly, as all the stories we've been hearing today have been showing us, this is what law enforcement is doing. Naturally, that shows us just about everything about the nature of law. And so, I mean, as much as police and prison guards may sometimes act like a rogue street gang, they're not. They're directly expressing the overall will of this form of law, and which relies upon keeping people homeless and buildings empty, and relies upon having a criminalized migrant population that is always at risk of deportation. And I just want to again emphasize serious respect for all the policy work that people are doing around reducing recidivism and around prevention and all of that. And at the same time, I want to say, as we're going forward in this work of trying to keep each other alive and out of the dragnets, since this is the nature of the law, there is not a way that in that work we are going to be acting in harmony with those codes and being smoothly prevented from recidivism, however that is defined. Though, of course, technically criminal behavior carries hugely different consequences for different racial groups and different class groups. So not to present myself as an authority on that, but just to put that out there and to say thanks to everyone who has brought those stories here today.
Unless anyone on the panel wants to comment on that, I actually feel really great about that being the way we close. Does anyone have anything to say? So I want to echo that. What, pardon?
Susie.
Oh, Susie. So sorry. A quick thing before we close out.
I would love to say a final word to everyone. So, there are so many more pieces to this very complicated issue that I would encourage those of you who are not on our mailing list to be on our mailing list so that we can continue to send you out information to let you know what's going on, what the facts are, where you can get involved, where you can make a phone call that will really matter. At the same time, there's several things that have been said that I would like to question and have us all walk away with as questions. First of all, anytime you see the police asking for more power, we need more police power. There's some things in the legislature right now that are being proposed. Whenever you see something being a new piece of behavior being criminalized, I'll ask you to think about, this is the realm of human behavior. There used to be a teeny little sliver that was a crime. Now, every year we criminalize more behaviors. And the reason that we have so many problems, and and we think about criminal behavior, we need to think, wait, what made this a crime? A crime is a humanly constructed thing, right? It's a concept. We need to shrink back to what was considered a crime 30, 40, 50 years ago. We create new crimes in the legislature every single year. So that when something bad happens to you and you see that your initial response is that you want to inflict harm on that person, that's your gut response often, right? You want to hit back. That's natural. To think beyond that, to think beyond harm, beyond punishment, the initial response that, I want that person locked up, I want that person punished, I want that person somehow hurt because we were hurt, right? To think maybe there's a different response socially to interpersonal harm that is more restorative, more reparative, that can help us all build stronger communities.
To what Susie said, in places in other countries, and mostly in Africa, when someone has done something that was offensive to that community, they would surround that person. Number one, they would tell them all of the good things that they did. And we do that with restorative justice, but we don't do the second part, which is critical. They ask that individual, how did we fail you? Yes. There is a community accountability. And so that's what I'd like to leave you with how did we fail and some community accountability.
Close out the forum. We want to thank everybody for being here, for everybody for sticking it out. We want to, but before we close out, we do have a table at the front. Some of you may have signed in to the Root email when you came in. If you have not done that yet, please do that on your way out. Vermonters for Criminal Justice mentioned materials and emails on that table as well. I'm holding their email right now. Please sign up for this email list if that's something that interests you as well. And we have some other information on the table as well. One project is called the I Am Vermont 2 project, which is a photo story project that's challenging racial microaggressions. And the reason why it's on the table is for two reasons. One, we are partnering with people of color within the state of Vermont to challenge racial microaggressions. I'm not going to spend the time talking about what that is right now because the information is on the table and you can read it if you don't understand those terms. But if you're a person of color or know people of color within the state of Vermont, we are doing this photo story project. Part of what this project is to create a tool to develop a statewide people of color caucus. And one of the reasons why we're doing that, as what you've heard today, and as we talked about earlier, is that racial injustice is insidious. It's insidious in our world, in our country, and it's insidious in Vermont. And we as people of color need to start really organizing. The other reason is that I work with the Vermont Worker Center, and we are doing an inequality survey. We are specifically reaching out to communities who are either incarcerated or families of those who have been incarcerated in the state of Vermont. So we also encourage you, if you identify as any of those groups, to please get information about the I Am Vermont 2 project and the inequality survey, because we would like to hear your voices so you can be in the forefront of the social justice movement that's going. And then the last thing is we have a Black Lives Matter Day activity, and Camille, could you just say what that is? That information's on the table as well.
Absolutely. This weekend, the Movement for Black Lives is calling to reclaim Martin Luther King Day. So Saturday, yesterday, was the day to divest from systems of oppression, oppressive institutions. And Monday, tomorrow, Martin Luther King Day is the day to reinvest in our liberation. And so the Brattleboro Outing Club is hosting an open community ski and snowshoe day. The trail passes are free or by donation. Equipment rental is available, sliding scale $2 to $20. And proceeds go to the Brattleboro Outing Club and or to Black Lives Matter Vermont. And there will be information, resources, materials about Black Lives Matter
available in the ski hut as well to honor the work and legacy of Dr. King.
And right before Fisher closes us out, I just don't want to forget to thank all of our panelists for being here. Some who came very far, and also Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform folks for coming all the way down from Root and Vermonters. And I want to thank Bridget and Janice for interpreting today. And Ezra for filming. It's going to be on BCTV. And many other people who helped set up and make this event happen. Who's upstairs? And the wonderful youth, Allison, Kayla, Maya, and Zanaya, who are providing childcare accessibility for people at this forum.
So, hi again. As we just mentioned, there are a number of people who help us put on these forums. And there are a number of people that help us volunteer to keep the Root running. So if you're a volunteer, feel free to raise your hand if you helped put today on, if you've helped with other events at the Root. If you're interested in volunteering at the Root, you can be in touch with Angela, Sheila, who just switched over to become our volunteer coordinator. We're always looking for more hands and more brains on deck. The other thing about today is that any proceeds that will be put into this jar, which is sadly I can see through right now, any donations today are going to be split between the Root and Vermont Criminals for redistribution. To be split between the organizers of today's event. The Root is also 100% grassroots funded. If you are interested, we have monthly sustainer forms if you're interested in funding the work that we do. So the money that comes in through monthly sustainership helps us do things like pay interpreters and pay childcare for these events. It helps us buy snacks and food for these events, have tea and coffee out for other folks that use the space, and it helps us generally keep our doors open for all the amazing work that's being done in our community. So again, today's event is by donation if you can. No need to, but highly encouraged to help us keep moving forward and having more of these events for the community. Thank you so much.